Now, y'all have asked the questions, and I am here to deliver. Got a bunch of questions this week, so it is a full day of a Mailbag Wednesday on a Thursday.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, you can also find us on YouTube as well. So make sure to check us out there. Of course, we are free and we are available on YouTube also every single day. My name is Caroline Fenton and I am your host, as I am every day. You can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. You can also follow along with the podcast at Locked On LSU. However you interact, whenever you listen, wherever you listen, just appreciate you for being here. But let's get into it. I had a ton of questions and interaction on the show this week, so I am here to deliver a full day of a mailbag, a full day of responding to some of your questions, comments, concerns, etc. If y'all like this, we'll do this every week. Full day of your questions asked. But before we get into some of your questions, just a few news and notes. LSU baseball out on the diamond in Hoover. First pitch at 4:30. LSU taking on Arkansas, who had a fun game. Extra innings game against Arkansas, took down Texas A&M 6-5 yesterday. On Wednesday, Texas A&M will advance to the losers bracket, but it's going to be a really fun game. I mean, obviously it's Hoover. These games are always weird and always unexpected. Like, I don't know if you watched the Alabama-Florida game last night. I didn't expect that game to be anything special. Honestly, I kind of expected Florida to kind of whoop that butt. Went into extras. It was a crazy ending. Florida walked it off. So, like I mentioned, anything can happen in Hoover. But this is going to be a fun matchup because it is Paul Skeens, obviously, as we know, who is unstoppable, incredible, SEC pitcher of the year, leads the SEC, leads all of college baseball in strikeouts, one of the best ERAs in college baseball, the best ERA in the SEC, going up against Arkansas's ace, Hagen Smith, one of the top left-handed pitchers in the country. He has the lowest ERA on the team, leads Arkansas with 93 strikeouts. This is what we saw from LSU earlier this season when they took on Arkansas, is that they kind of struggled against those lefties. Arkansas threw two lefties at them, and that I think they played on a Thursday night that week. Whatever, game one. So that'll be a really fun and interesting game to watch. Looking forward to it. First pitch at 4:30 Central. But let's get into some of your questions. I know you'll have a bunch of them, and I'm just excited to be here. First question that I have. The Florida State game. How important is the Florida State game? And how will that set the tone for the rest of the season? And I know I could sit up here and say, well, every game's important, but you have those certain games that you put asterisks next to, that you circle, that you star, that you're like, okay, this is a big one. And this isn't a big one just because it's the first game of the season. Starting your season off on a good note is always, a positive thing. But Florida State is getting so much love preseason. I looked at ESPN's most recent preseason post-transfer portal rankings, and they've got Florida State as the third best team in the country. Jordan Travis has one of the best odds to win the Heisman Trophy, and of course, those things change. But for where it stands right now, Florida State is getting a whole lot of love. They're returning a whole lot of production on both sides of the ball. Everyone's looking at Florida State like they could be a potential national title contender this year. So that's what makes this game so key and so interesting. So, how important is this game? I'm not going to say it's a must win because I feel like that term just gets thrown around too much. And once we throw it around too much, then it starts to kind of dilute its meaning. Like, it's not a must win game. Now, if you are in, let's say, Fiesta Bowl, college football playoff semifinal, now that's a must-win game. You got to win that game because you would have compete for a national title. But it's a really, really, really important game because not only is Florida State getting all the love preseason, you're also getting a whole lot of love preseason. There's a whole lot of buy-in to what Brian Kelly is doing. And I'm not just talking about in the locker room. I'm talking about nationally. Jaden Daniels is getting, some Heisman discussion. LSU across several college football circles is slated as winning the West for the second year in a row. I mean, a lot of people that are very dialed into college football, people whose opinions matter, people whose opinions are listened to, love LSU. They see big things for LSU this season. So it's important because it's a measuring stick of where you really truly are. Somebody's going to be disappointed after that game. Somebody is going to be quote unquote exposed after that game, which is what I think the headlines are going to be after that game, even though I don't think it's necessarily true. But let's look at the outcomes, possible outcomes, possible scenarios. You lose that game. Okay, well that sucks. I think it depends on how you lose that game. LSU lost that game last year by a single point in the most devastating fashion because LSU made the most frustrating blunders in that game that could have been the difference of a win and a loss. Now, LSU did some impressive things in that game, but overall, everyone looked at LSU like, oh, choked that one away. Oh, couldn't even make an extra point at the end of the game in order to tie it up. Couldn't even kick that field goal. And that would have been the difference of the game. Can't even fill a punt. So if it's in that kind of fashion again, I think that's a different story of if Florida State blows LSU out. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think both of these teams are far too good for that to happen. But let's say that does happen. It's a measuring stick game. Florida State is just that much better than you are. It wouldn't make you feel very good about this season moving forward. If it's a really, really, really close game and it's a loss, it's still starting your season 0-1. We still have questions about what Florida State can be. Because after Florida State beat LSU, everyone was saying, oh my goodness, Florida State is this amazing, wonderful, incredible team. Well, Florida State didn't beat a single ranked team on their schedule this past season. Pretty average. Believe they went 8-4, maybe 9-3 in the regular season. I'll check on that. If you win, then you beat a team that everyone was saying was going to be a national title contender. You beat a quarterback that everyone wants to circle for the Heisman Trophy this year. So if you lose this game, there's going to be a whole lot of question and a whole lot of doubt of, oh, well, there we go again. Yet another year of hyping this team up, not necessarily LSU, but just a team in general, hyping up a team that might not be very good. Oh, there we go again. Jaden Daniels can't do it. How good is Florida State really? Because even though with all of those questions arising, the reality can still be, all right, well, LSU loses that game to Florida State. If they win out the rest of their schedule, they probably get a playoff bid. Of course, that depends on what happens around the rest of college football. But let's say Florida State goes undefeated, hypothetically. Florida State goes undefeated. LSU's only loss in their schedule is Florida State. You're playoff bound. And I feel pretty confident about that. If you lose that game, though, it's really easy to come up with that scenario in your mind. But if you lose that game, it opens up a whole lot of questions. So it's important because it's a measuring stick. It's important because we can talk all off season about how good Jaden Daniels can be, how good this defense will be, how great of a first year Brian Kelly had. And those things are all fair conversations and all fair discussions and fair points to make. But until we actually see that come to fruition on the field, it's all going to be based in opinion and speculation. And if you lose that first game, if the first time we see this team on the field all together is a loss, well, then that's when the questions arise. I don't want to start the season with questions. I don't want to lose back-to-back games to Florida State. So this game's important. If you win, your season is very much so alive. If you lose, your season is very much so alive. But there's one of those scenarios that I feel a whole lot more confident in, and I think you know which one it is. More of your questions coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Bird Dogs. Y'all, Bird Dogs seriously might be the most comfortable shorts I've ever worn in my whole entire life. It's a super cute color. I got a bright blue color. I feel so cute and girly in them, but they also fit so well. And they also are super comfortable. Sometimes when you look at shorts that fit well, maybe when you sit down, they get a little bit too tight, or you have a big meal and maybe they get a little bit too tight. Well, bird dogs, the waistband gives a little bit. You can tie them up tighter if need be. You can loosen up the tie. They've got an elastic band so you can eat freely and sit freely, lay on the couch and watch college football all day long, whatever you want to do. Bird dogs are the perfect option. You can wear them to the office. They've got pants and shorts. You can wear them out at the pool. You can wear them golfing. You can wear them just hanging out. If you're going to the lake this weekend for Memorial Day weekend, enjoy it, have fun, be safe. But wear your bird dogs. Bring your bird dogs with you. They're so versatile. They fit so well. And I just washed my bird dogs for the first time. They launder so easily. So, if you do your laundry, whoever does your laundry, assure them, like, hey, bird dogs are probably going to be the easiest thing that you have to take care of this week. Bird dogs are so great, so comfortable. And I'm not the only one that thinks that, because Bert Kreischer wakes up at his lake house. He'll probably be there this weekend for Memorial Day weekend. He puts on his bird dogs, goes for a swim in the lake, smokes a cigar, grills some burgers in classic Bert Kreischer fashion, chills with his family all day long, swims in them, hangs in them, wears his bird dogs all day long is what he associates with summer. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. And when you enter promo code lockedoncollege, they will throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every single order. So comfortable. They look great. Bird Dogs, check them out at birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Every day is tomorrow on the podcast. We will chat with Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider. There are players that are being pulled every single which way. Oregon, USC, Alabama, Maryland, Michigan, Ohio State, and LSU. So which players in the 2024 and 2025 classes, 5 stars, that are, consensus top players in the country, which are seriously considering LSU? We will get into that on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU with Brian Smith, our official Locked On insider. But today is your day. Today is a Mailbag Wednesday on a Thursday. So we'll get back into some of your questions. One person asked a very interesting and very fair question about the podcast yesterday. I broke down the defensive line. And on the podcast, I posed the question, can LSU or will LSU have the best defensive line in the country? And I think it's a fair question to ask, considering that you're getting one of the best defensive linemen in the country back from injury, that you're kind of stacking that on with Mekhi Wingo, with Harold Perkins on the outside. You're piecing it together with all of these, with these transfer portal players, Jalen Lee, Parashand, so on and so forth. But Megabucks asked the question on YouTube. Remember, I do this every week, and you can also comment all your questions on YouTube. You can totally do that in addition to sending in your questions on Twitter. Megabucks asked the question, what's going on with Quincy Wiggins? Which is a very fair question whenever we're talking about the defensive line. And I don't mean to ostracize certain defensive line players. At least I didn't mean to do that in my breakdown of the defensive line. There are a whole lot of guys in that defensive line room that I didn't mention, and that's for no particular reason other than I was focusing more on some of the superstars, some of the newcomers that we have questions about. But Quincy Wiggins is a wonderful player to bring up, and I'm so glad that Megabucks did. Because a little bit of a refresher about Quincy Wiggins. He had his true freshman season this past year. Quincy Wiggins was a 4-star, 5-star, however you want to put it, coming out of high school. He went to Madison Prep in Baton Rouge. So he's a local kid. He's a homegrown kid. He's 6'5", 273, defensive lineman. I mean, he's got massive size. And also, this is coming from his 24/7 sports profile. So he's bound to have put on a whole lot more weight since then, of nutritionists at LSU, being in the weight room at LSU. So I would say add between 10 to 15 pounds onto that 273 that he was at coming out of high school. And I mean, he's an absolute monster. 6'5". He is an absolute monster. He was the top prospect out of Louisiana in the 2022 class, the 9th ranked defensive line prospect in the country, and top 50 in the country per 24/7 Sports. So kids, all of that to say, kids got a whole lot of talent. I mean, kid's got the size, he's got the body type, and he did what he needed to do in high school to prove himself to be one of the best defensive linemen in the country. But last season, he struggled with an injury. Game one against Florida State, he was on the sideline with a boot on his leg. We knew he was going to be out for that game, but Quincy Wiggins was only able to come back and play in 5 games this past year. Let's see. Let's look at this, which 5 games he played in. He played against Mississippi State, so kind of early in the season, New Mexico, Auburn, Tennessee, and then he was out until the bowl game against Purdue. He got his most work against Purdue in that bowl game. So on the season, he totaled 5 tackles, 3 solo tackles, 2 with an assist, and that was really the total amount of work that Quincy Wiggins got this past year. 1, the injury held him back a good bit. 2, he was a true freshman. But I think you can see Quincy Wiggins get a lot more work this year, assuming that he's 100% healthy and coming in his second year. I think you can absolutely look at him to be a guy that's competing for more work, potentially even be a starter. I think anything's on the line. I don't think that it's just reserved, like starting spots are only solely reserved for transfer portal players. I think it's just whoever is the best player will win snaps, will win that starting job. Quincy Wiggins absolutely is part of that. I think of him in the same way that I kind of think of maybe like a LaTerrence Welch, for example. LaTerrence Welch is coming into his second year. He's actually the only returning corner on this roster, which is wonderful. But LaTerrence Welch is kind of in the same situation. You know, he got limited snaps this past year just because he was a true freshman coming into it feels weird to call it a loaded room, but I guess it really was. He got limited snaps, got some work, and got to show a little bit of what he can do. But in his second year, we're expecting a whole lot more. So appreciate pointing out Quincy Wiggins because he's totally somebody that we should be keeping an eye on. More questions from you on a Mailbag Wednesday on a Thursday. We'll get into those coming up next. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. It's Hoover Week. It's SEC Tournament Week. Let's get into some of your baseball questions. One person asked the question, I do think that we can win a national title, but I'm worried about the bullpen. Can we win a national title with the bullpen? You know what? Me too. I am worried about the bullpen too. I have been worried about the bullpen for quite some time. If you've been listening to the podcast over the last couple of weeks, first of all, I appreciate you. Thank you for being such a loyal listener. Second of all, it's a huge problem. If you're worried about the bullpen, I'll tell you what, you're right. You should be. Because the bullpen was ultimately why LSU lost those series to Auburn and Mississippi State. The bullpen is LSU's weakest part on this team, and I don't even think that it is close. So you are so justified in feeling worried or concerned about how far the bullpen can carry LSU throughout the postseason. But I will tell you this. I look at the talent on this team. Dylan Cruz, SEC Player of the Year. He's the best player in college baseball. Paul Skeens, SEC Pitcher of the Year. He's the best pitcher in college baseball. They're going to go 1-2 in the MLB draft, more likely than not. And it's not just those two. I mean, we focus on those two because they're probably the focal points, but you look at Tommy White and Trey Morgan and Jordan Thompson and Hayden Travinsky and Gavin Dugas. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. This team is star-studded. This team has no excuse to not win a championship because it has so much talent. But if the bullpen ultimately does get in the way, I think that this is the situation that warrants somebody losing their job. And I don't like to do that. I don't like to call for somebody's job, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Called for Brian Polian's job several times last year. But I will reiterate, desperate times call for desperate measures. If you lose early, let's say you make it to Omaha as I'm having some, there we go, webcam issues, we're back. If let's say LSU gets to Omaha and they get bounced early, or they don't even make it to Omaha. If this team falls short of what this coaching staff really thinks it can do, then I think you need to start looking long and hard at Wes Johnson's position on this baseball team. Because if it's the bullpen that gets in the way of the two best players in college baseball from winning a championship, something has to change. I mean, that's just honestly unacceptable. And bullpen injuries happen. Man, it happens. It happened to this team. It has happened to this team before. Unfortunately, it's going to happen to this team again. Injuries happen to teams across the league. How can you adapt? How can you overcome? How can you continue to find good things and guys down your depth chart and be able to use them to help you win games? Look, I've liked what I've seen from Thatcher Hurd over the last couple of outings. I really have. I've been more encouraged by Thatcher Hurd from his last outing against Georgia that Thursday night in his game against. God, why am I drawing a blank of who LSU played? South Carolina, duh, of his outing against South Carolina in Hoover. I've been encouraged by what Thatcher Hurd has done. So I'm feeling a little bit better. Okay, now you have 3 starters that you feel pretty good about: Paul Skeens, Ty Floyd, and potentially Thatcher Hurd. But this team's too good to let the bullpen get in the way. So I'm with you. You know, I do worry about the bullpen getting in the way of LSU winning a national title. But I think you need to do some long and hard thinking about the direction of this pitching staff and who you want to be leading it. Because it's not like LSU came into this season with no pitching talent. I mean, Thatcher Hurd was a very highly sought after transfer out of UCLA. And I know Garrett Edwards and Chase Shores, unfortunately, are out for the season. But that was the number one priority this offseason, was to get pitching depth. Christian Little, on top of that, Christian Little, the transfer from Vanderbilt, he hasn't really wowed me. And for the longest time, they didn't seem to get better. There's still a whole lot of baseball left to be played. I mean, we got a full postseason left, and I'm ready for it. I'm pumped for it. But don't rob Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz of a championship because your pitchers couldn't close out a 9-run lead. Knock on wood, it's happened before. Hopefully it won't happen again. But very fair question and all very, very fair concerns. But like I mentioned, LSU in action at 4:30 this afternoon, taking on Arkansas. What a fun little pitching matchup. I think all eyes in college baseball, definitely in the SEC, are going to be on this pitching matchup. Paul Skeens on the mound for LSU and Hagen Smith, the lefty, little southpaw action from Arkansas. So looking forward to that. I'll have a full breakdown of all the Hoover action on Monday. So everydayers, make sure to check that out. Appreciate you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We'll see you next week at Locked On LSU.